I'm going to ask you, if you will, to turn over to 1 Corinthians. Turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 13 to be specific. We're going to be looking there here in just a moment. Before we do, I'd also like to take this opportunity to welcome each and everyone here with us. We're excited that we're able to be here, but we are especially excited to have our visitors with us. Let us get to know you, or let us talk to you, ask how things are going if we've already gotten to know you once. But I want to come back to why we're excited to be here. You see, we bring up that we're excited. We bring up that we want to be here. And we do this, I want to say, almost every Sunday. Almost every Sunday we say how excited we are, but this morning I want us to focus on one reason that at least I'm excited. I'm excited that we're able to come and build ourselves. We're able to come and take what we know and build upon it to make us be better than we were. Because that's really what it's about. Being a Christian means we're building ourselves, means we're building so that we can walk better into the light and the path which is set before us. And so we are really excited that we're able to be here. Now, if you remember, back in December, and I don't know how many will, but I used this same slide, the same welcome slide, and the reason I did is because we were talking about being content. And brought up the fact that when we want our cup to continue to be filled and yet it's overflowing, we can't be content, right? Well, this morning we're going to look further into being content. But instead of looking at what we already did, we're going to look at something deeper. One specific area. But before we get there, I want us to review it just a little bit. I want us to review what we already talked about. And what we did is that we looked over in Hebrews chapter 13, and we looked in verses 5 and 6. There, where the Hebrew writer is talking about being content, but what we see is that we're able to be content physically. And the reason that we're able to be content physically is because of how our focus is. We aren't focused upon the physical. We aren't focused upon these things which pass away, upon these things which will be destroyed one day. But rather, we focus spiritually. And when we do that, it allows us to be content physically. We also looked over in Philippians chapter 4. And when we looked there, and we read it this morning, we're going to look at Philippians chapter 4 a little bit more this morning. But when we did this back in December, we looked at this one point. And we touched just briefly on it. And it was that being content is a learned trait. I want us to remember that as we go forward, because this morning we're going to come back to this. Because this is a point that I really wanted us to look more at. I really wanted us to spend more time on. We see the last thing that we looked at, we actually find in both Hebrews chapter 13 and we find over in Philippians chapter 4. And that is when we talk about being content, when we talk about being able to be content, what it provides. And what we looked at is a very, very large umbrella of it, is that it provides our best life. When we're able to be content and we're not focused physically, our life is better. Because we're not focused on all these other things, these things that might cause extra worry or worries that are unneeded. We're able to have a better life. This morning, I want us to continue to look at being content. But as we looked at back in December, we looked at the definition that man has. Man says it's to find a state of happiness. And sometimes when people say that they're content, that they're in this state of happiness, others will say things like we're lacking. That we lack certain things. That we find a way to be happy with what we have, but that we still don't have everything that we need. That's not what being content means. It doesn't mean that we're lacking anything. It doesn't mean that we're lacking joy or happiness or knowledge or any of these things that some might say. Oh, you're able to be content because you don't know everything. That's not what being content means. Or they'll look and they'll say that being content means that we're just getting by. I can tell you right now as a Christian I am not just getting by. Matter of fact, I am living an abundant life. We looked at that a few weeks ago. We don't just get by saying we're content. We don't sit here and say, I'm content, so I'm good with what I have. Now, physically, yes, we're good with what we have physically because we know its value really isn't there. But are we good with what we have spiritually? This morning, we're going to look more at that because we talk about being content, and we have to understand that doesn't give us an excuse to say, I don't need anything else, and I don't need to get further into the Word of God. It's actually the opposite. You see, we're able to say that we are content. And the reason is this, is we're not using the standard of measure that man does. We're not using what they measure joy with, what they measure happiness with, what they measure knowledge with, or any of these things. We're not using it. Why? Because we have a better standard. We have a standard that doesn't change over time. Rather, we have a standard that is firm, that is fast, and will always hold true. You see, when we talk about being content, what it really does mean, I ask you to turn over to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. This is somewhere we turn often to look at love. Why do we turn here? Because it describes love for us, doesn't it? It tells us very clearly what love is. It also tells us what love isn't. But I want us to focus on verse 2. And here's the reason. When we read verse 2, Paul writes to the church at Corinth, and he says, and though I have the gift of prophecy, pay attention to what comes next. He says, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge. And though I have faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. Well, I want us to focus on something he mentions there. He says, though I have the gift of prophecy, and he knows mysteries and knowledge. We don't need prophecies anymore. So we are content in our life without them, aren't we? Why? Because the mysteries and the knowledge which needs to be revealed, the mysteries and the knowledge which we need as Christians, has been revealed to us. And it's available for us. This is why we are able to say that we are content. Because these things are available. Because these things are open to us. We are able to say that we are content because when we turn over to Romans chapter 15, and we read there in verse 13, in Romans chapter 15, reading there in verse 13, Paul writes to the church at Rome, and there he says this. He says, now may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace in believing, that you may abound in hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. We're able to say that we are content. Why? Because we're not looking for the joy of man. Because the joy of man ultimately is unneeded, untrustworthy. But the joy of God, well, that is one that is fast. This is why we're able to say that we are content. Why we are able to say that I am content physically. When we look over in Colossians chapter 2, verse 10, and it says, and you are complete in him, speaking of Christ, who is the head of all principality and power. Why am I able to say that I'm content, that I am sufficient, that I don't need other things? Because I already know where I'm made complete. Now, we talk about all these things, but it all really comes back to this. I'm content because I trust God. That's really where it comes back to. But do we really show that we trust God? Do we really show that we actually are content? Over in Psalm, and we're going to read this real quick. Over in the 9th Psalm, verse 10. In the 9th Psalm, verse 10, it says, and those who know your name will put their trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken those who seek you. Well, hold on. We put our trust in God, right? But then what does it go on and say? It says that he will not forsake you who what? Who seek him. This is really where I want us to get to for our lesson this morning. Because we can talk about being content until we're blue in the face. We can talk about being content all day long. But do we let that reflect in our life? Do we let the fact that I'm content physically reflect? Well, how do we do that? We let it build. We let contentment do its job. We talked in our Bible class this morning about things that we have, about things that are offered. And about how each thing that we have, talking specifically about rejoicing with those who weep and weeping with those who rejoice. Or rejoicing with those who rejoice, weeping with those who weep. That's what we talked about in our class this morning, right? Well, we talked about what that does for us. Guess what? Being content does something for us as well. It's not just a state. Is it a state? Yes. But it's not just a state. It's so much more. I asked you to remember what we're told over in Philippians chapter 4. The screen says verse 13, but really we're going to start in verse 11, or verse 10. Philippians chapter 4, we're really going to start again in verse 10. It says, "But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly, that now at least your care for me has flourished again, though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need." Pay attention to what he says right here. He says, "For I have learned, in whatever state I am, to be content." He says, "I know how to abase and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." Let's focus on that this morning. I have learned. But the question isn't this. The question isn't, have we learned? The question is, do we know why we want to learn? Do we know why we want to learn to be content? What's actually the reason behind it? We can look at many things, and one is because of our focus. But this morning we're going to focus on 4 different things. First, being strength. We want to learn to be content. And why? Because when we do, it provides us strength. I ask you to turn over to staying in Philippians chapter 4. Staying in Philippians chapter 4, and we're going to look now specifically at verse 13, where it says, "I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me." But what did he say before that? He talked about the fact that he's able to know this. Because why? Because he's content. He's able to know that Christ is the one who strengthens him, that everything is possible through Christ and his strength, because he's not focused on everything else. You see, we're able to do these things when we don't need something else. When we don't need an outside source trying to give us unneeded or ultimately untrustworthy strength. Over in Galatians chapter 6, we're going to read verses 6 through 10. In Galatians chapter 6, reading verses 6 through 10, Paul writes to the church at Galatia, and there he writes this. He says, "Let him who is taught the word share in all good things with him who teaches. Do not be deceived, God is not mocked. For whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. For he who sows to his flesh will of the flesh reap corruption. But he who sows to the Spirit will of the Spirit reap everlasting life." Pay attention to verse 9. He says, "And let us not grow weary while doing good. For in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart. And therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially those who are of the household of faith." We talked about verse 10 a lot in class. We're not going to talk about that. But what we are going to talk about is the fact that it says, "Do not grow weary in doing good." Do we let our being content manifest itself, show itself, and build strength? Build strength so that we don't grow weary. Build strength to say, I don't need something else, because I have what I do need. I have my strength, which as we looked at in Philippians, comes from the Lord. Are we content in knowing that? Do we allow it to help us? Do we allow it to help us that in our strength, we realize that we're not alone? And by our strength, I mean God's strength. You see, we are a social people. Mankind is social. We need that interaction. You see those who don't have it, And what do they say? They say they end up going kind of crazy, don't they? What happens when you put somebody in a white box? Well, they kind of lose their mind. We need social interaction. We need to know that we aren't alone. Guess who else needed to know that he wasn't alone? Joshua. Joshua needed to know when Moses was passing the torch, when Moses was telling him that you are now going to lead the Israelites for God. He needed to know that he wasn't alone. Over in Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 8, Moses, speaking to Joshua, he says this. He says, "And the Lord, he is the one who goes before you. He will be with you. He will not leave you nor forsake you. Do not fear, nor be dismayed." What's he telling him? He's telling him, be strong. Because everything you need to not be alone, everything you need to lead this people is available. And it's available because of God. Because he is there with you, because he wants you to succeed, because he wants you to have it. That's why he tells Joshua this, because he needed it. In our life, when we face times that we might need strength, it's there. We know that it's there. But we have to be content to know that that's all I need. That I don't need something else. But we also need to learn to be content because we need to have more knowledge. Like I said, content doesn't mean we don't have knowledge. And content doesn't mean that the knowledge we do have, that I'm good with it. When we are content, we desire more. When we are content with the things that exist physically, we will desire more spiritually. And why is that? Why is it that we desire more? Over in Hosea chapter 4, verse 6. In Hosea chapter 4, verse 6, something that we actually do use more often than we might realize. There it says, "My people are destroyed for a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I will also reject you from being priest for me. Because you have forgotten the law of your God." Speaking to the Israelites. They had forgotten God. Why? They were no longer content with God. They were no longer recognizing that that's all they needed. And because of that, what did they do? They neglected him. They rejected him, and they did not have his knowledge. Are we content with what God has given us? To say that his knowledge is all I need, and because I know that, because I know that his knowledge is all I need, I'm not going to be sufficient in maybe the small knowledge I have. But rather, I'm going to say, I need more of God's knowledge. And then we get to the point and say, I need more and I need more. And it should never end. It should never stop because, as we've said before time and time again, each time you open up the Word of God, you will find something you did not see before. And this is how we know that we can be content with what's available. But we should desire to have more. We should desire to have more of this knowledge that it's only from one source. That's God. James chapter 1, verse 5. James chapter 1, verse 5, he says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." He doesn't give and say, now I'm going to reproach you. No, he gives and he says, I'm going to keep giving it to you. You want that knowledge? Have it. He says, keep taking it. Keep having it. He wants us to. He wants us to recognize that I am so content in knowing that that's all I need, that I'm going to keep searching for it. He wants us to be fed. No matter what state of life we're in, he wants us to be fed. He wants us to have his knowledge. Turn over to Jeremiah chapter 3. See, sometimes we think because I'm not in a very good state, I'm in this state where I need to go back and I don't need the knowledge, that maybe that's not where I'm at. But that's not what God tells. That's not what he tells his people. That's not what he tells the Israelites. And the Israelites, we know very well, and we know that they rejected God time and time again. And yet, what does he tell them? He says in verse 14 of Jeremiah chapter 3, he says, "Return, O backsliding children." The children who had rejected God, rejected their Lord, he tells them, "Return to me." And if you return, he says, "For I am married to you." He has a bond with them. Do we not know he has a bond with us as well? Are we not content in that bond that he has, that we don't need another? But he says, "I am married to you. I will take you, one from a city and two from a family, and I will bring you to Zion." Pay attention here in verse 15. He says, "And I will give you shepherds according to my heart, who will feed you with knowledge and understanding." If the shepherd is coming from the Lord, where do we think the knowledge and understanding is coming from? The Lord. And so we need to be content to know that's what I want. We need to be content to know I don't need any others. But we need to be content to know that I want to be complete. And that many times when we look at those who desire to be complete, they desire to have a life's purpose, what do? They go and search for that piece of the puzzle. And they say, where am I going to find this piece? And in doing so, they search, sadly, in many of the wrong places. In many of the wrong areas to search and say, how can I be made complete? But when we're able to recognize that we're content in the Lord and what he offers, then we can be made complete. We can be made complete instead of being like those who are grasping for this piece of the puzzle that they're not going to find. Turn over to Ephesians chapter 4, or Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Because over in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 6, it says, "Better a handful with quietness than both hands full together with toil." They are grasping at their labors. They are grasping at their toils. We see that at the beginning part of this chapter. But what does he say here at the very end of verse 6? He says, "In grasping for the wind." Has anybody ever tried to catch the wind? It can be utilized. It can be used. But we can't catch it. That's what happens when we say that I'm not content in being made complete in the Lord. I want to be made complete elsewhere. It's like grasping at the wind. It can't happen. Instead, we look and we say that I'm content to know that it is Christ who calls me. It is Christ who wants me to be made complete. Turn over to Luke chapter 5. Because when we look in Luke chapter 5, Jesus is eating with sinners and tax collectors. And he's asked, why are you eating with them? Why are you eating with sinners and with tax collectors? It doesn't make sense to them. But what does Jesus respond? He responds and he says, "Those who are well have no need of a physician." We can change that. Those who are not lacking, but those who are complete, those who are righteous, have no need of a physician. But let's continue in verse 32. He says, "I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance." He says, "I have come to make them complete." Because that's what it means. He has come, he calls us to what? To be complete in him. The only way that we can be made complete in Christ is when we recognize he's all I need. You see, being content will build our life. It will make our life better, but we have to let it. Not only do we have to let it make us better, we have to want it to make us better. And we have to want to know that this salvation, this better thing, it's only from him. Romans chapter 8, verse 1. In Romans chapter 8, verse 1, it says, "There is therefore now no condemnation to those who are in Christ Jesus, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit." There's our idea of being content. Walking not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. Because when we are content, that's what we do. And when we do this, what does it say? It says, there's now no condemnation in Christ. Are we content? Are we content in our life? And has this contentment allowed us to desire more joy? And I don't mean the joy that the world thinks they have. I don't mean the joy that man thinks that they can find in going to a theme park. I love roller coasters. Guess what? That joy is nothing. And I would say nothing compared to Christ, but no, it is nothing. It has no value. It has no worth. The joy that does is from Christ. And not only is this joy from Christ, but what we also see is that it comes only from Christ. I ask you to turn over to the 30th Psalm. Because while we might look and see that wrath comes from him, that vengeance can come from him, we also see that joy will come from him. Over in the 30th Psalm, verse 5, it says, for his anger is but for a moment. Yes, his wrath will come, but for us, it's only going to be a little while. He says, his favor is for life. Weeping may endure for a night. But what? But joy comes in the morning. Joy is what's there. Joy is what remains. Are we content with his joy? Or are we looking for our own? Are we looking for our joy somewhere else? Well, guess what? Not only is the joy available, he wants us to be joyous. He wants us to have this joy. He doesn't want us to lack. He doesn't want us to be looking for it somewhere else. He wants us to be content in him. Over in John, the 15th chapter, verse 11, it says, these things I have spoken to you, that my joy, he says, that my joy may remain in you. He wants us to have his joy. But he goes on, he says, and that your joy may be full. How is the only way that that's going to be possible? Can our joy be made full if we are looking for joy where there's no value? Absolutely not. Can our joy be made full when it has all value? When it has so much value that I don't even think we can try to number it? Yeah, it can be made full then. But it's only possible in Christ. You see, we can talk about all of these things, and there's so many other things that we could talk about where contentment, being content, helps build our life and helps make our life better. But I really wanted us to look at a few actual examples. I'm not saying actual people, but things that actually happen. One of them is being strong in discipline. Being content in the discipline and in the measures which God has provided, the instruction which he has provided, and not looking elsewhere, not looking for something else, but saying, I'm going to follow what he says. Because guess what? I'm not going to mention names, but I do know of a specific example that's happened recently. A young lady was disfellowshipped from her own family. They said, you have fallen away, and we're not going to be around you. We're not going to have these things to do with you. If you want to come to church, come to church. If you want to have a Bible study, have a Bible study. But we're not going to the movies with you. We're not inviting you to Thanksgiving or anything else. 10 years went by. She came back to the Lord. 10 years. But they remained steadfast. They remained content in his instruction. And she returned. Came back, repented to come back to the Lord. We have to be content in his instruction because his instruction works. His instruction saves souls. We have to be content in his instruction because our faith is going to be questioned. There are going to be those who question what we believe, who question why do we believe it. and if we are not content in our faith, to say that I don't need something else, then it's going to be a whole lot more difficult to stand in it. But when we are content with what is available, because what is available is all that we need. When we are content in it and say, I don't need something else, we can stand firm. And we can stand for truth and for righteousness. That's why we must be content. That's why we have to say, I'm content. And though some might question our faith, but some might even go so far as to condemn us because of our faith. And we have to be willing to stand in that faith and say, that's fine. But I am content in my faith. I am content in the will of God. And because of that, you can condemn me all day long. But what's going to be made? What's going to happen? We will stand justified. We will stand purified only by God. Last time we talked about being content, I asked, are you content in God? This morning, I'm not going to ask that. Instead, I'm going to ask, do we allow our contentment to grow? Do we allow ourselves to grow in our contentment? Do we allow it to make us better? Because we should. If we allow it to sit there and manifest and show and build, it will make us better. This morning, I ask if there are any here who are not yet baptized, who haven't come forward, who haven't been baptized, who haven't recognized in their life that I am content in the only way possible unto salvation. And I'm ready to be a part of that. If you need to be baptized this morning, we ask you to do so. If you need to make things right in a public manner, if you realize that in our life that we have shown the world that I'm not content with this, that I'm not content with the Scripture and I need to do something, make things right in a public manner, we ask you to do so. Come forward and make things right. Or maybe we need strength. Maybe we need some help being content. Sometimes people don't like asking for help. Well, don't be afraid to ask. Because when we're not afraid, it gives us the opportunity, but it also gives us the strength. The strength that we talked about this morning that comes from God. Whatever the case may be this morning, we ask and we plead with you. Come forward as we stand and as we sing.